This isn't an emergency. This is Thursday. Keep your $5. That's what a Hells Angels biker said to a 5-year-old girl who hadn't eaten in 5 days. She was sitting alone on a concrete step, a crumpled $5 bill in her pocket she refused to spend, because her mama said it was for emergencies, and she wasn't sure if starving counted. 53 people walked past her that afternoon. A preacher with a Bible under his arm, a deputy in a patrol car, a woman with a bag of food in her hand. Every single one of them kept moving. Then a man covered in tattoos with a Hells Angels patch on his back pulled up, killed his engine, and did the one thing an entire town refused to do. He sat down. What happened next forced Ridgefield, Georgia, to look in a mirror that nobody wanted to face. If this story hits you, subscribe, follow it to the very end, and comment what city you're watching from. Let me see how far this reaches. This is a story about hunger, not just the kind that lives in your stomach, although that was real enough. This is about the hunger a town had for someone to blame, and the hunger a little girl had for someone, anyone, to simply sit down. Emma Dawson was 5 years old, and she was sitting on the concrete steps outside the old feed store on Broad Street in Ridgefield, Georgia, and she had not eaten a real meal in 5 days. Her legs didn't reach the ground. Her sneakers, once pink, now gray from wear, dangled above the cracked sidewalk. She wore a yellow sundress with daisies on the hem, bought from a church donation bin, washed so many times the fabric had gone see-through at the seams. And she wasn't crying. That's what haunted people later. She wasn't making a sound. Her hands were folded on her knees, her eyes watching the street with the patience of a child who had already figured out something most adults spend their whole lives avoiding, that the world doesn't come when you call it. So she stopped calling. 5 days earlier, her mother, Jessica Dawson, had scraped the last bit of butter across a stale cracker, split it in two, and given Emma the bigger half. Then Jessica quietly put her own piece back on the plate when Emma wasn't looking. "Mama, aren't you eating?" "I'm not hungry, baby. Grown-ups are built different. Our stomachs don't need as much." Emma believed it the first day. By the third day, she noticed her mother's hands shaking when she poured water. By the 5th day, she stopped asking, because even at 5, she understood that some lies are told out of love, and pulling on them would break the person telling them. That Thursday afternoon, Jessica had left Emma on those steps with one instruction. "Sit right here. Don't move. Don't talk to strangers. Wait for me." She pressed a $5 bill into Emma's hand. "This is emergency money, only for emergencies." She kissed her daughter on both cheeks, the kind of kiss that holds on too long because it's trying to say everything the mouth can't. And then she walked toward Highway 41, where the Dollar General was offering a stock clerk position she'd already been rejected for twice. Emma sat, and she waited, and she held that $5 bill in her pocket like a secret, because her mother had said the word emergency, and Emma wasn't sure yet whether being hungry for 5 days was an emergency or just the way things were now. And the people of Ridgefield walked past. Mrs. Lorraine Vickers, who owned the fabric shop on the corner and who had personally appointed herself the moral authority of Broad Street, walked past twice. The first time she slowed. She looked down at Emma with the kind of squint people use when they want to appear concerned without actually doing anything about it. The second time she crossed to the other side of the street entirely. She adjusted her purse strap like it was the most important task in the world, and she kept walking. Pastor Dale Simmons from Ridgefield Baptist came next, Bible tucked under his arm, phone pressed to his ear. He was talking about the church roof fund, how they were $1,500 short and the deacons needed to step up. He glanced at Emma. 1/2 second of eye contact. 1/2 second where he could have stopped, could have bent down, could have asked one simple question. He looked away. He kept walking. He had the Lord's work to do in every direction except the one sitting 6 feet to his left. Deputy Ray Perkins cruised by in his patrol car at 2:30. He saw the girl. He slowed the cruiser. He looked at her through the open window. He didn't stop. Later, he'd tell himself he assumed she was waiting for someone, which was true. But the truth underneath that truth, the one he wouldn't say out loud, was that he assumed she wasn't his problem. And that was the truth that would keep him up at night 3 weeks later, staring at his bedroom ceiling at 2 a.m., replaying that moment in his head. Tammy Greer came out of Mabel's kitchen with a takeout bag. She got in her SUV. She looked through the windshield at Emma for 2 full seconds. She started the engine. She drove away. 53 people. That was the number someone would count later, going through the afternoon in their memory like turning pages. 53 people passed that child on those steps. Not one of them stopped. Emma's stomach growled. She pressed her hand against it and pretended it was the wind. She watched a stray cat across the street lick its paw. She wondered if cats were ever really hungry or if they always found something. She thought about the last real meal she'd had, fried chicken and cornbread at the church supper 11 days ago. She'd eaten 2 plates. Her mother had eaten nothing and said she had a stomachache. Emma had been with her mother the whole morning that Sunday. She hadn't seen Jessica eat a single thing. Then, at 3:12, the sound came. Not one engine, several. A deep, rolling thunder that shook the glass in Mabel's front window and made the ground hum under Emma's sneakers. Inside the restaurant, 2 conversations stopped cold. Lorraine Vickers, who had circled back to her shop, froze with her hand on the door. 2 old men on the barbershop bench sat up straight. 3 Harley Davidsons came around the curve past the old post office, riding in formation. And the man in front rode the way he did everything, without apology, without performance, and without a single sign that he cared what anyone watching might think. Jake Holden, president of the local Hells Angels chapter. He was 6'3", arms covered in tattoos, a skull with roses on his left forearm, an eagle across his right bicep, the words "Ride Free" in Gothic script along his wrist, and the Hells Angels death head on his upper arm. His leather vest carried the club patch on the back, the chapter rocker on the bottom, and a row of pins along the front that told a story most people in Ridgefield had never bothered to read. He had no helmet on. That detail alone would be reported to 6 people before sundown. The 2 riders behind him, Tommy Wrench Ballard and Marcus Cole, peeled off toward the gas station. Jake's Harley rumbled to a stop right in front of the feed store. He killed the engine. The silence hit like a wall. Jake sat on the bike for a moment, scanning the street. Then his eyes dropped, and he saw her. A 5-year-old girl, alone, sitting perfectly still, hands folded, not crying, not calling for anyone, just waiting. He looked at her the way you look at something that doesn't fit. Not with suspicion, not with the kind of pity people use when they want credit for noticing, but with the sharp, quiet attention of a man who sees what other people have trained themselves to walk past. Emma looked back at him. She looked at the large, tattooed, bearded man in the Hells Angels vest, sitting on a motorcycle 3 feet away from her, and she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She didn't shrink. She studied him with the same calm patience she'd been giving the stray cat. And after a moment, she gave a small nod, one brief dip of her chin, like she was confirming something she'd already decided. That was something people would remember later. The fact that the 5-year-old was the only person on Broad Street who looked at Jake Holden without deciding what he was first. Jake swung his leg off the bike. He walked to the steps, and without a word, without asking, without hesitating, he sat down beside her. Not across from her, not standing over her. He sat on the same step, his long legs folded, his elbows on his knees, looking out at the street in the same direction she was looking. A Hells Angels biker and a 5-year-old girl in a faded yellow dress, side by side. "Hot," Jake said. "Yes, sir," Emma said. He glanced at her. "Been sitting here a while?" "My mama said to wait." "Okay." He paused. Then, plain as anything, "You hungry?" No pity in the question, no angle, just a man asking a child a question that expected the truth. Emma thought about the $5. She thought about the word emergency. She thought about her mother's shaking hands and her practiced smile. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I think I am." Jake stood up. "Don't go anywhere." He walked into Mabel's kitchen. The bell above the door rang, and every head in the restaurant turned at once. 4 people at the counter, 3 couples in booths, 2 teenagers sharing a milkshake. They all looked. They all looked away just as fast. Mabel Turner was already reaching for the coffee pot. 71 years old, silver-haired, built like a woman who'd spent 4 decades on her feet and had the backbone to prove it. Jake. Mabel. She started to reach for a menu, then stopped. Jake Holden had been eating here since he was 23. He'd never once opened a menu. "I need a plate for the little girl outside," he said. "Whatever's hot, meat, vegetables, bread," he paused, "and a slice of pie if you've got it." Mabel looked through the window at Emma, still sitting, still waiting, still not crying. "That's Jessica Dawson's girl," Mabel said. "I don't know whose girl she is," Jake said. "I know she's hungry." Mabel held his eyes for a beat. Then she turned to the kitchen window. "Earl, I need a country plate special and a slice of sweet potato pie. Now." She looked back. "You eating?" "Coffee's fine." He pulled 2 20s from his wallet and put them on the counter before the food came out. Didn't count. Didn't hesitate. The gesture was automatic. Not generosity as performance, but generosity as reflex. He carried the plate out himself. Chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes with gravy, collard greens, a buttermilk biscuit, the pie in his other hand, a cup of sweet tea braced against his forearm. He set it down in front of Emma. She stared at it. She didn't move for a long moment. Jake set the pie beside the plate and sat back down. "Go ahead," he said. "I have $5, Emma said. "Emergency money." "This isn't an emergency," Jake said. "This is Thursday. Keep your $5. She looked at him. He looked at the street. Then she picked up the fork. And the way she ate, carefully at first, with the cautious precision of a child who has learned not to trust that food will stay, and then with the quiet, focused intensity of someone who has been genuinely hungry for 5 days. That was the thing Jake Holden would carry with him for the rest of his life. The sound of that fork against the plate. The way her small hand gripped it like it was the most important tool in the world. He drank his coffee. He said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Inside Mabel's, the atmosphere had changed the way air changes before a storm. Lorraine Vickers arrived 4 minutes later with the timing of a woman who understood that the best seats for the second act require quick positioning. She took the stool by the window and leaned toward Donna Mitchell, who had appeared with suspicious speed. "I don't know what he thinks he's doing," Lorraine said, her voice tuned to sound private while reaching every ear in range. "A Hell's Angel, sitting with a child, right out in the open." "He bought her food," Donna said carefully. "We don't know what he bought her. We don't know his intentions. Someone needs to call Ray." Deputy Ray Perkins got the call at 3:47. He arrived at 3:55, rolling past the feed store with his window down. What he saw: Jake Holden sitting beside a small girl, an empty plate, a half-eaten slice of pie, a man in a peaceful posture, a child who was, by every visible measure, completely fine. Ray drove around the block twice. This was the behavior of a man hoping the situation would solve itself before he had to get out of his car. It didn't. He parked. He walked over. Thumbs in his duty belt, face wearing the look of a man who needed to appear official without having decided what being official would require. "Jake? Ray? Everything all right here?" "Just fine." Ray looked at Emma. "You okay, sweetheart?" "Yes, sir," Emma said. "This man bought me chicken fried steak." She paused, then added with the precision of a child who believes in complete reporting, "and pie, and sweet tea." Ray looked at Jake. Jake returned the look with the steady patience of a man who had been looked at as a problem so many times the experience no longer produced anything but endurance. Her mother know where she is? My mama told me to wait right here, Emma said. She went to get a job. Ray scratched the back of his neck. He stood there 10 seconds, recalculating. The situation had the deeply uncomfortable quality of an emergency that wasn't one. You need anything? He asked Jake, with the embarrassed tone of a man who'd shown up with a hammer and found no nails. We're good, Jake said. Ray walked back to his cruiser. He called Lorraine. Everything's fine. Girl's waiting for her mother. Jake bought her dinner. Long pause. Well, Lorraine said, then quieter. Well. But in Ridgefield, Georgia, well was never the end of anything. It was just the pause before the next version of the story started building. By 4:15, Tommy and Marcus had come back from the gas station. They leaned against their bikes across the street, not hovering, just present. Tommy walked a bottle of water over to Emma without being asked. Marcus waved at her from across the street, and Emma, who had just eaten her first full meal in 5 days, waved back. A small, matter-of-fact wave. And Marcus, 6'4", 260 pounds, a face that generally made people cross the street, waved back with a gentleness that surprised even Tommy. Jessica Dawson arrived at 4:32. She came around the corner from Hickory Street, breathless, blouse dark with sweat, her face carrying the expression of a mother who'd been telling herself for hours that everything was fine and was now about to find out. She saw Jake first, then Tommy and Marcus, then the motorcycles, then the patches. She stopped walking. Jessica Dawson had been born in Ridgefield, married here, married Billy Dawson at 20 in the Little White Church on Pine Street. Billy left 22 months ago, walked out on a Tuesday while Emma was at daycare, left a note on the table that said, I can't do this anymore, without specifying what this was. Though Jessica understood, once the shock dissolved, that this meant her, meant Emma, meant the trailer and the bills and the life that had narrowed into something he didn't want to stand inside of anymore. She'd stayed because leaving cost money she didn't have and required a plan she couldn't form. She knew what people thought. She felt it in the way Mabel sometimes slid the coffee across the counter without looking up. She heard it in the gaps between words when conversations resumed after she passed. She knew Lorraine had told at least 5 people about the past due electric notice taped to her trailer door. She knew the category, young mother, abandoned, broke, probably did something to deserve it, and the phrase that followed, bless her heart, which in the South converts judgment into pity, just enough for the person saying it to feel generous, while keeping the person it's said about exactly where she is. Now she was looking at her daughter sitting beside a Hells Angels biker and an empty plate. And every wall she'd built, every practiced smile, every I'm fine, every careful arrangement of composure, cracked all at once. She crossed the street fast. Emma, her voice came out harder than she meant. Mama, this is Jake. He bought chicken fried steak. Jessica put her hand on Emma's shoulder and stepped between her daughter and the man on the steps. Jake stood, slow, deliberate, making himself smaller in motion, trying not to escalate anything. He was bigger up close. The tattoos were more visible. The skull and roses, the eagle, the death head, the leather vest with the patches. Ma'am, he said, what do you think you're doing? The question had an edge she hadn't aimed for. She watched it land on his face, not as offense, but as recognition. The face of a man who had been asked this question in this exact tone so many times it no longer produced anything but patience. Your daughter was hungry, he said. She had money for... Jessica stopped. She looked down. Did you eat? I had chicken fried steak, Emma said, and pie, and sweet tea. He said it wasn't an emergency, so I kept the $5. Jessica looked at Jake. Something moved in her expression. A fracture in the wall, quickly patched. How much do I owe you? Nothing. I'll pay you back. There's nothing to pay back. He said it the way you say the ground is under your feet. A plain fact about how things are. Jessica stared at him. Then she looked away, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with something she would not let fall in front of this man, or this street, or this town that had walked past her daughter for an entire afternoon. And the $5 bill stayed in Emma's pocket, unspent, waiting for something good. That night, Jessica Dawson sat at the kitchen table in the trailer on Piney Creek Road with the lights off and her daughter asleep in the next room, and she held a plain white card between her fingers. A phone number written in pen. Grace Holloway, Hope Bridge Food Bank, Cypress Street. Jake had given it to her before he left. He'd pulled it from his vest pocket while Lorraine Vickers stood 10 feet away, pretending not to listen. And he'd said it simply, without performance. There's a woman I know at the Hope Bridge Food Bank, Grace Holloway. She doesn't broadcast it, but if you call ahead, she'll put something together. Real food, produce, meat, bread, not just canned stuff. Jessica had taken the card the way a drowning person takes a hand, with resistance and relief tangled together so tight you can't tell which one is winning. Now she sat in the dark, turning it over. She could hear Emma breathing through the thin wall. Slow, steady, full. The breathing of a child who had eaten a real meal for the first time in 5 days and had fallen asleep before her head hit the pillow. Jessica picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked it up again. She dialed. It rang 3 times. A woman's voice answered, warm, direct, no nonsense. This is Grace. My name is Jessica Dawson. Jake Holden gave me your number. There was a pause, not the kind that makes you nervous, the kind that means someone is giving you their full attention. Jessica, I'm glad you called. I'm not sure I need. How old is your daughter? 5. When's the last time you both ate a full meal? Not her, both of you. Jessica opened her mouth to say something that wasn't true. She closed it. She tried again. What came out was the truth, and it surprised her. I don't remember. Grace didn't hesitate. Come by Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock. I'll have everything ready. Produce, chicken, bread, eggs, butter, real food, enough for 3 weeks. I can't pay for. Jessica, there's nothing to pay. That's not what this is. Jessica pressed her hand against her mouth. She would not cry. She would not cry on the phone with a stranger because a biker she'd been afraid of had given her a card that led to a woman who was offering her food without conditions. She would not cry because that would mean admitting how close to the edge she actually was, and she had spent the last 22 months building a wall between herself and that edge, and the wall was all she had. She cried. Not loud, not dramatic, the quiet, shaking kind that happens when something you've been holding finally lets go. And the relief is so enormous, it comes out as grief. Grace stayed on the line. She didn't say, it's okay. She didn't say, don't worry. She just stayed. When Jessica could speak again, she said, Tuesday, 9 o'clock. I'll be here, Grace said. Jessica hung up. She sat in the dark for a long time. Then she got up, checked on Emma, still sleeping, one arm thrown across the pillow, the yellow sundress folded on the chair beside her bed. And she went back to the kitchen and wrote, Tuesday, 9 a.m., on the back of the card in handwriting that shook. By Friday morning, the story of Jake Holden and the Dawson girl had reached every corner of Ridgefield. That's how small towns work. Information doesn't travel, it multiplies. It walks into the barber shop at 7 a.m. and walks out at 7:15 wearing a different outfit. It sits in the church parking lot after Wednesday night prayer meeting and grows legs. It gets whispered across the counter at the hardware store and shouted across the parking lot at the Dollar General and murmured into phones late at night by people who start every sentence with, I probably shouldn't say this, but, and then say it anyway. By Friday, there were at least 4 versions. Version 1, the most popular, circulated primarily by Lorraine Vickers, went like this. A Hells Angels biker had approached an unattended 5-year-old on Broad Street, bought her food, and was now giving her mother phone numbers and showing up in places where children were present. Lorraine used the phrase grooming behavior without understanding it, and she used it 3 times before lunch. Version 2, favored by the men at the barbershop, was more cautious. Curtis Hayes, who'd been cutting hair in Ridgefield for 26 years, said he'd never heard of Jake doing anything wrong. Man keeps to himself, rides his bike, pays his taxes. That's more than I can say for half the people in this room. But Curtis said it quietly, because in Ridgefield, defending Jake Holden out loud required a kind of courage that most people reserve for things that affected them directly. Version 3 came from Mabel Turner, who said very little but said it to the right people. He fed a hungry child. End of story. Mabel's version was the shortest and the most accurate, and for that reason, it was the least repeated. Version 4 didn't have a single author. It floated through the town like smoke, appearing in conversations as a question rather than a statement. Where was everybody else? This version was the most dangerous because it pointed the mirror inward, and most people in Ridgefield were not ready to look. On Saturday morning, Lorraine Vickers called an emergency meeting of the Ridgefield Women's Civic League, which was not an emergency and was barely a league, but which gave Lorraine a platform and a captive audience of 11 women in the fellowship hall of Ridgefield Baptist. She stood at the front of the room with a notepad she didn't need because she had rehearsed what she was going to say the way a prosecutor rehearses a closing argument. I want to be clear, she said. I'm not saying anything has happened. I'm saying we need to be vigilant. We have a responsibility to the children of this community. Patty Reeves, who was sitting in the 3rd row and who had known Jake Holden since he was a teenager, raised her hand. Lorraine, what exactly are you suggesting happened? I'm suggesting that a known member of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang approached a 5-year-old child who was alone on the street and fed her, Patty said. He fed her because she was starving. We don't know she was starving. She hadn't eaten in 5 days, Lorraine. The room shifted. 11 women rearranging themselves in their chairs. How do you know that? Lorraine asked. Because I talked to Jessica. I called her Thursday night, which is more than you did. Lorraine's mouth tightened. I tried to help Jessica. I went up to her on the street. You went up to her to gather information. There's a difference. The silence that followed had teeth. Patty Reeves was not a confrontational woman. She taught Sunday school. She baked casseroles for funerals. She had never, in 20 years of Civic League meetings, directly contradicted Lorraine Vickers. The fact that she was doing it now told everyone in the room that something had shifted, that the ground they were standing on was no longer as solid as they'd assumed. Lorraine recovered quickly. She always did. All I'm saying is that someone should be looking into this, for the child's safety. Looking into what? Patty said. A man who bought a hungry kid a plate of food? You want to investigate that? Then let's investigate why she was hungry in the first place. Let's investigate why 53 people walked past her and nobody stopped. Let's investigate that, Lorraine. Donna Mitchell, sitting in the back row, whispered to the woman beside her. 53? That's the number, Patty said, turning. 53 people walked past that child on Thursday afternoon. I know because Mabel counted. She was watching from the restaurant window the whole time. She counted every single person who looked at Emma Dawson and kept walking. The room went very quiet. I was one of them, Patty said. Her voice changed, dropped. I drove past at 2:15. I saw her. I told myself she was fine. I told myself her mother was probably inside one of the shops. She paused. Her mother was across town begging for a job. And I drove past. No one spoke. So before we start talking about Jake Holden's intentions, Patty said, maybe we should talk about ours. She picked up her purse. She walked out. The door closed behind her with a sound that was not loud, but felt final. The meeting lasted another 14 minutes. Nothing was decided. Nothing was organized. The women filed out in ones and twos, and most of them did not look at each other on the way to their cars. That same Saturday, something happened that nobody expected. Jake Holden walked into the Ridgefield Credit Union on Main Street. This was notable because the Ridgefield Credit Union was where, in 2014, a break-in had occurred that was never solved, and Jake Holden's name had been attached to that crime in the specific, persistent, evidence-free way that small towns attach names to crimes when they've already decided who the criminal is. He walked in at 10:15 in the morning. He wore a clean shirt, no vest, no patches. His hair was tied back. He looked like what he was, a man doing business on a Saturday morning. The teller, a young woman named Christy, who had started 3 months ago and didn't know the history, smiled at him and said, "How can I help you?" "I'd like to set up a recurring donation," Jake said, "monthly, to the Hope Bridge Food Bank on Cypress Street." "Sure, how much?" $200 a month. Christy processed the paperwork. "That's very generous." "It's not generous," Jake said. "It's groceries." Behind him, Helen Walsh, who had been on the credit union board since 2010 and who had been one of the loudest voices connecting Jake's name to the break-in, stood frozen at the deposit counter with a check in her hand, watching a man she had publicly called probably a criminal set up a monthly donation to feed people. She didn't say anything. She finished her deposit and left. But she sat in her car for 4 minutes before starting the engine. And when she got home, she told her husband, and her husband said, "Helen, I told you 6 years ago those rumors were garbage." And she said nothing, which was as close to admitting he was right as she had ever come in 31 years of marriage. On Tuesday morning, Jessica Dawson walked into the Hope Bridge Food Bank. She had changed her outfit 3 times before leaving the trailer. She had told herself this was not a big deal. She had told herself she was doing this for Emma. She had told herself every lie that makes asking for help bearable. And none of them had worked, so she walked in anyway, raw, exposed, her pride stripped down to the studs. Grace Holloway was waiting. She was a tall woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the no-nonsense energy of someone who had been doing this work for 15 years and had zero patience for shame. "Jessica?" "Yes, ma'am." "Come on back." Grace led her to a table in the back room. On it were 3 boxes, not the sad, dented cans and expired pasta that Jessica had expected. Real food, fresh produce, tomatoes, greens, apples, potatoes, a whole chicken wrapped, a dozen eggs, a loaf of bread that was still warm, butter, milk, orange juice, a bag of flour and a bag of sugar, and a small bottle of vanilla extract. Jessica stood there looking at it and something broke open in her chest. "Jake called ahead," Grace said. "He wanted to make sure I had the good stuff, not the canned nonsense." "Why?" Jessica's voice cracked. "Why does he care?" Grace took off her reading glasses and looked at Jessica with the steady, unflinching directness of a woman who had spent 15 years watching hunger up close and had stopped being surprised by anything except cruelty. "Because Jake Holden grew up hungry," she said. "His daddy drank every dollar that came into that house. His mama left when he was 11, and the school lunch program was the only reason he ate 5 days a week. On weekends, he didn't eat at all. He never talks about it, but I've known him for 12 years, and I'll tell you this, that man has never walked past a hungry person in his life. Not once. Because he remembers what it feels like when everyone else does." Jessica pressed both hands flat on the table. She breathed in. She breathed out. "He has never asked for credit," Grace continued. "He has never asked anyone to say thank you. He paid for the new freezer unit in this building out of his own pocket, and he told me to tell people it was a county donation so nobody would know. He's been fixing the roof here for 3 weekends because it leaks every time it rains, and he won't let me pay him. His guys, Tommy, Marcus, they come out every other Saturday and fix cars for free for single mothers and elderly folks. They've been doing it for years. Nobody writes about it. Nobody talks about it. Because talking about it would mean admitting they were wrong about him. And this town would rather be wrong than admit it. Jessica picked up the box of groceries. Grace picked up the other two and walked them to Jessica's car. At the door, Grace stopped her. Jessica, you're not weak for being here. You're strong for showing up. There's a difference, and don't let anyone in this town tell you otherwise. Jessica drove home. She unloaded the groceries. She stood in her kitchen looking at a full refrigerator for the first time in months, and she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was the thing that comes before happiness, the thing that makes happiness possible. It was the feeling of not being alone. That evening she cooked dinner, real dinner, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, biscuits from scratch with the flour and butter Grace had given her. She set the table, both places, with real plates, not paper, and she called Emma. Emma came to the table and stopped. Mama, sit down, baby. That's a lot of food. I know. Are you eating too? The question landed like a fist, because Emma had asked it with the careful, watchful precision of a child who had been monitoring her mother's eating for weeks, tracking every meal that was skipped, every lie about not being hungry, every sacrifice disguised as a stomachache. Yes, Jessica said, I'm eating too. They sat down together. Jessica served Emma first, then herself. A full plate. She picked up her fork and she ate, and Emma watched her eat with an expression that started as suspicion and slowly, carefully, like a door opening 1 inch at a time, became relief. They ate in silence for a while. Then Emma said, Mama? Yeah, baby. Jake said to keep the $5 for something good. That's right. I'm going to keep saving them. What for? Emma thought about it. Hard. The way 5-year-olds think about things. With total commitment, like the answer matters more than anything in the world. I don't know yet, she said, but I'll know when I see it. Jessica looked at her daughter across that small table in that small kitchen, in that trailer on Piney Creek Road, and she thought about Jake Holden sitting down on those steps without being asked, and she thought about Grace Holloway standing in the food bank saying, You're strong for showing up, and she thought about the 53 people who had walked past, and she thought about the $5 bill in the ceramic piggy bank on Emma's dresser, and she understood something she hadn't understood before. The people who help you are not always the people you expect, and the people you expect to help you are not always the people who will. On Wednesday night, Jessica looked up Jake Holden. She called Grace first. Tell me about Jake, the real version, not the town version. Grace didn't hesitate. Jake Holden is one of the best men in this county. That whole club has done more for the people in this town than the town has ever done for them. And anyone who says different can take it up with me personally. She called Patty Reeves next. Patty was more careful, but said the same thing. The credit union investigation had concluded 18 months after the rumors started. 0 evidence, 0 charges. The report was filed and forgotten. The rumors were filed and remembered. Jessica sat with that. She sat with the specific, documented reality of a man being judged by people who had never once asked him for his side of the story. And she recognized it, the way you recognize your own face in a photograph you didn't know was being taken. Because they had done the same thing to her. Different category, same mechanism. The town had looked at Jake and seen a criminal. The town had looked at Jessica and seen a failure. Neither verdict required evidence. Both required only repetition, and both were wrong. Thursday morning, Jessica walked into Mabel's kitchen with Emma. Jake was at the counter, second cup of coffee, talking to Mabel about the leak in the Hope Bridge roof. He looked up when the bell rang. Jessica met his eyes. She gave a single nod, firm, compressed, carrying the weight of everything she couldn't say yet, but meant completely. Jake nodded back, and Emma climbed onto the stool beside him, like she'd been doing it her whole life. Hi, she said. Hey, kid. I still have my $5. Good. What are you saving them for? I don't know yet. Something good. and the muscles around Jake's eyes moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile, but held the architecture of one, the kind that had been built a long time ago and hadn't been used much since. That was when Lorraine Vickers walked through the door. Lorraine stopped in the doorway for exactly 1 second. Her eyes found Jessica at the counter, then Emma on the stool, then the Hells Angels vest hanging on the back of Jake's chair. She processed all of it the way a camera processes film, fast, complete, permanent, and something flickered across her face that she buried before it could fully form. She walked to a booth by the window. She sat down. She opened the menu she had memorized 15 years ago and pretended to study it. Mabel watched from behind the counter. She had been watching all week, watching the story grow legs and walk through her town, watching the whispers multiply, watching the same people who had walked past a starving child now position themselves as concerned citizens, protecting that same child from the only man who had stopped. Something had been building inside Mabel Turner for 11 days. Pressure, the slow, compressing kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself until the moment it breaks through. She poured Jake another cup of coffee. She poured Jessica one without asking. She brought Emma a glass of milk and a sugar cookie from the kitchen, and Emma said, "Thank you, Miss Mabel," with the quiet formality of a child who had been taught manners by a mother who believed that politeness was one of the few things poverty couldn't take from you. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. The restaurant hummed with the ordinary sounds of a Thursday morning. Forks on plates, coffee being poured, the low murmur of conversations that meant nothing and cost nothing and required nothing. Then Lorraine spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had spent decades perfecting the art of the carrying whisper, the kind of statement that is technically addressed to one person but engineered to reach every ear in range. "I just hope Jessica is being careful," she said to Donna Mitchell, who had materialized in the next booth with the reliable speed of a woman who could sense conflict the way animals sense storms. "She has a little girl to think about, and maybe she doesn't know everything about the kind of people she's associating with." The words traveled across the restaurant like a stone skipping across water, touching down here, 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 and every person they touched went still. Jessica's hand tightened around her coffee cup. Jake didn't move. Emma, who was focused on her cookie, didn't hear it, or if she did, she didn't understand it, which was a small mercy in a morning that was about to run out of them. Mabel set down the coffee pot. She didn't slam it. She placed it on the counter with the careful precision of a woman who has decided something and is now moving through the actions that decision requires. She came out from behind the counter. She walked to the center of the restaurant, not fast, not slow. The pace of someone who has earned the right to take up space and intends to use every inch of it. She was 71 years old. She had buried a husband, raised 2 children alone, survived a recession, a flood, and a kitchen fire that had nearly taken the building and her with it. She had fed this town for 38 years. Its hunger, its gossip, its celebrations, its grief, and she had never once stood in the middle of her own restaurant and demanded that everyone listen. Until now. "Lorraine," she said. The restaurant went silent. Not the gradual fade of conversations winding down, the instant total silence of a room that has recognized the weight of what is coming. Lorraine looked up from her booth. Her face arranged itself into pleasant surprise, the way it always did when she sensed she was about to be challenged and wanted to appear unprepared for it. "I want you to tell me one thing that Jake Holden has actually done." Mabel let the sentence sit. She let it breathe. She let it fill the room like smoke. One thing, not a rumor, not something you heard from Donna, who heard it from Curtis, who heard it from somebody's cousin at the gas station. One specific, verified, factual thing that you personally know to be true. Lorraine opened her mouth. "One thing," Mabel said. Lorraine closed her mouth. The silence was enormous. It had weight and texture and temperature. Every person in that restaurant felt it pressing against their skin. That's what I thought, Mabel said. She turned. Slowly. She looked at every face in the room. The farmers at the corner table who had been eating here since before their beards went gray. Deputy Ray Perkins, who had come in for lunch and was sitting with his fork suspended between his plate and his face, frozen in the act of eating like a man caught in a photograph he didn't know was being taken. The two high school kids with their milkshakes, wide-eyed, sensing that they were witnessing something they would talk about for years. Donna Mitchell, trying to disappear into the vinyl of her booth. Curtis Hayes from the barbershop, studying his coffee with the desperate concentration of a man who wished the floor would open and swallow him whole. This man, Mabel said, and she pointed at Jake without looking at him, because this wasn't about Jake, and she wanted them to understand that, sat down beside a 5-year-old girl who had not eaten in 5 days. She paused. 5 days. Another pause. And he fed her. He walked into my restaurant, put $40 on my counter, and asked me to make that child a plate. Because the rest of us, every last one of us, walked past. Ray Perkins put his fork down. I have been running this restaurant for 38 years, Mabel said. I have served thousands of meals, thousands. And the one I am most proud of is the plate I made for that little girl. Her voice held steady, but something underneath it trembled. Not weakness, but the vibration of something true being said out loud for the first time. But it should not have been Jake who had to ask me for it. She looked at the room. It should have been one of us. Nobody moved. Lorraine, Mabel turned back to her. You walked past that child twice. Twice. I saw you from this window. The first time you slowed down, you looked at her, and then you crossed the street. Lorraine's face went white. Not pink, not flushed, white. The color of a person watching a wall come down that they did not know could fall. The second time you adjusted your purse strap and kept walking. I watched you do it. I stood right here behind this counter, and I watched you decide that a hungry 5-year-old girl sitting alone on a sidewalk in 90-degree heat was not your problem. I didn't know she was, Lorraine started. You didn't ask, Mabel said. That's the point. You didn't ask. Lorraine's hands were shaking. Her iced tea was sweating on the table beside her, and she hadn't touched it, and wouldn't touch it, and would leave it sitting there when she eventually stood up and walked out, because picking up a glass requires a steadiness she no longer had. Mabel wasn't finished. Pastor Dale walked past her with a Bible under his arm, God's Word in one hand, phone in the other, talking about the church roof fund, while a child sat 6 feet away, wondering if she was going to eat that day. He didn't stop. She turned. Deputy Ray drove past in his patrol car, slowed down, looked at her, kept driving. Ray Perkins stared at his plate. He did not look up. He would not look up for the remainder of Mabel's speech, and he would sit in that booth for 20 minutes after she finished, alone, not eating, not moving, just sitting with the specific weight of a truth he had spent 2 weeks trying not to carry. Tammy came out of this restaurant with a bag of food in her hand. Food. In her hand. She looked at that child through her windshield, started her engine, and drove away. Mabel's voice had not risen. That was the thing. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't angry in the way people expect anger to look. Loud, explosive, directed. She was angry the way a river is powerful, steady, relentless, impossible to stop. We all walked past, she said. Every one of us. And then a man with a Hells Angels patch on his back. A man this town has spent 8 years treating like a criminal without a single piece of evidence, did what we should have done. What any one of us could have done. What none of us bothered to do. She picked up the coffee pot. She held it at her side like a weapon she had no intention of using, but wanted everyone to know she had. And then we spent a week and a half talking about his intentions. The word intentions came out with a precision that made it sound surgical, like she had sharpened it specifically for this moment. Lorraine, you used the word grooming in my restaurant last Friday. I heard you say it. You used that word about a man who bought a hungry child a plate of chicken fried steak. You said it in a room full of people, and not one person challenged you, and I include myself in that failure. Lorraine's eyes were glassy. She was blinking rapidly. Donna Mitchell beside her had pressed herself so far back into the booth that she looked like she was trying to merge with the wall. If any of you want to have a conversation about intentions, Mabel said, I'd suggest starting with your own. She turned and walked back behind the counter. She set the coffee pot on the burner. She wiped her hands on her apron. She straightened a stack of menus that didn't need straightening, and she did not look at anyone because she had said what needed to be said, and the rest was not her responsibility. The silence lasted a long time, not the comfortable silence of a room at rest, the silence of a room that has been opened up and shown its own insides, the silence of people confronting the distance between who they are and who they have been telling themselves they are, a distance that, until 11 minutes ago, they had managed to keep invisible. Emma broke it. "Mama," she whispered, pulling on Jessica's sleeve, "why is everybody so quiet?" Jessica looked down at her daughter. She smoothed the strand of blonde hair away from Emma's forehead with fingers that were trembling, and she said, "Because sometimes, baby, people need a minute to think." "About what?" Jessica glanced at Jake. He was looking straight ahead, his coffee cup between his hands, his face unreadable, or readable only if you knew what to look for, which was the faint, almost imperceptible tension of a man who has just been publicly defended for the first time in his adult life and does not know what to do with that. "About being better," Jessica said. Curtis Hayes was the first to move. He stood up from his stool, put money on the counter, and walked toward the door. As he passed Jake, he stopped. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he put his hand on Jake's shoulder, briefly, firmly, and said, "I owe you an apology." Jake looked up at him. "I've been cutting hair in this town for 26 years, Curtis said. "People talk. I listened. I should have known better." "You don't owe me anything, Curtis." "Yeah," Curtis said, "I do." He walked out. The bell rang behind him. Ray Perkins stood up next. He left a 20 on the table, twice the cost of his meal, and walked to the counter. He didn't look at Jake. He looked at Mabel. "You were right," he said quietly. "All of it." Mabel nodded once. "I drove past that little girl in my patrol car," Ray said. His voice was low, meant only for Mabel, but in the silence of that restaurant, it carried to every corner. "I saw her." I slowed down. I kept going. I told myself she was fine. She wasn't fine. She was starving, and I drove past in a car that says, "Protect and serve" on the side. He put his hat on. He turned to Jessica. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stopped." Jessica nodded. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The lump in her throat was too large for words to get past. Ray walked out. One by one, the restaurant emptied. Not all at once, slowly, the way water drains. Each person standing, paying, leaving, and each one carrying something with them that they hadn't brought in. Some carried shame. Some carried resolve. Some carried the beginning of a question they weren't ready to answer yet, but couldn't put down. Donna Mitchell left without speaking to Lorraine, which was itself a seismic event in a friendship that had been built on the mutual agreement to always, always back each other up. Lorraine sat in her booth for a long time after everyone else was gone. Her iced tea sat untouched beside her, the condensation pooling on the table. Her notepad, the one she'd brought to the Civic League meeting, the one she'd used to organize her case against Jake Holden, was in her purse, and she was thinking about it, and thinking about the fact that she had filled 3 pages with rumors and suspicions and second-hand accounts, and not a single verified fact. She was thinking about the 2 times she had walked past Emma Dawson on those steps. She was thinking about the squint she had performed the first time, the practiced look of concern without commitment, and the way she had crossed the street the second time, adjusting her purse strap, choosing the other sidewalk, choosing to not see what was right in front of her. She was thinking about the word grooming and the ease with which she had used it, and the fact that she had used it about a man who had done nothing but feed a child, and the fact that no one had stopped her, and the fact that she hadn't stopped herself. She stood up. She left cash on the table, exact change, no tip, which was petty and small, and she knew it and did it anyway because she was not yet ready to be the person Mabel's speech was asking her to be. That would take time. That would take more than one afternoon in a restaurant. She walked past Jake on her way out. She did not look at him. He did not look at her. But at the door she stopped. Her hand was on the glass. Her back was to the room. "I shouldn't have said what I said," she told the door. About grooming. That was wrong." She didn't turn around. She didn't wait for a response. She pushed through the door and walked out into the afternoon. And Jake watched her go with the expression of a man who has been waiting 8 years for something that he isn't sure has actually arrived. Mabel refilled his coffee. "You didn't have to do that," Jake said. "Yes, I did." "Mabel, 38 years, Jake. I've run this place for 38 years. I've watched this town eat my food and share my gossip, and sit in my booths and pass judgment on people they've never bothered to know. I've watched them do it to you. I've watched them do it to Jessica. I watched them do it to that little girl, because ignoring a child is its own kind of judgment." She set the pot down. "I've been quiet for too long. That's on me." Jake was still for a moment. Then he reached across the counter and put his hand over hers, briefly, gently. And Mabel Turner, who had not cried in public since her husband's funeral in 2007, blinked twice and turned away to wipe down a counter that was already clean. Jessica touched Jake's arm. He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, for the food, for Grace, for sitting on those steps. You don't have to thank me. I know I don't have to. I want to." Emma had finished her cookie. She had chocolate on the corner of her mouth and was watching the adults with the attentive, patient expression of a child who understands that something important has happened, even if the full shape of it is still beyond her reach. "Jake," she said. "Yeah, kid. Are you going to come back tomorrow?" He looked at her. He looked at Jessica. He looked at Mabel, who had her back turned but was very clearly listening. "Yeah," he said, "I think I will." Emma smiled, not a big smile, the small, certain kind. The kind that says, "I knew it before you did." And the restaurant was quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something hard has been said and received and absorbed. And the room is different because of it. And everyone in it knows that going back to the way things were is no longer an option. Not because someone has forbidden it, but because they have seen themselves clearly. And clarity, once it arrives, does not leave. Mabel picked up the coffee pot and went back to work, because the lunch rush was coming, and people would need to eat, and that was what she had always done. Fed people, whether they deserved it or not, whether they were grateful or not, whether they were ready to be better or not. She fed them anyway. That was the thing about Mabel Turner. That had always been the thing. The weeks that followed Mabel's speech did not produce the clean, cinematic transformation that people expect from stories like this. There was no single moment where Ridgefield, Georgia woke up and decided to be different. That's not how people work. That's not how towns work. And anyone who tells you otherwise has never lived in a town small enough to know every face and stubborn enough to resist change the way a river resists a dam. Not all at once, but in slow, grinding increments that wear you down over years. But something had cracked open in that restaurant, and cracked things don't go back together the same way. It started with a glass jar. The morning after her speech, Mabel set a plain mason jar on the counter next to the register. No decoration, no sign, just a strip of masking tape with 2 words in black marker. Community plate. She didn't explain it. She didn't announce it. When Curtis Hayes came in for his morning coffee and pointed at it with his eyebrows raised, Mabel said, It's for people who need a meal and can't pay for one. Put something in or don't. That's the whole thing. Curtis put in a 5. He didn't say anything about it. He didn't need to. By Friday, the jar held $62. By the following Friday, $187. Mabel used it quietly, covering a check here, adding a plate there, and she kept no record of who received what, because she understood that the moment you start keeping score on generosity, it stops being generosity and starts being a ledger. And ledgers are what got this town into trouble in the first place. The first person she fed from the jar was a man named Howard Clemens, 74 years old, a retired pipe fitter who came in every Tuesday and Thursday and ordered coffee and a single biscuit and sat for 2 hours because his wife had died in March and the house was too quiet. Mabel had known for months that Howard was stretching his Social Security check to the breaking point. She had watched him count coins on the counter more than once, and she had said nothing, because Howard was proud and the wrong word would have driven him away. That Tuesday, she brought him the country plate special. Chicken fried steak, potatoes, greens, biscuit, full plate, full glass of tea. Howard looked at it. I didn't order this. I know you didn't. Mabel, I can't. You can, it's already paid for. By who? By the jar, which was filled by people who want you to eat a real meal, Howard. Don't argue with me. I'm too old and too tired, and I've been arguing with this town for 2 weeks straight, and I'm not doing it with you too. Howard looked at the plate. His jaw worked. His eyes went bright and wet, and he turned his face toward the window so she wouldn't see. But she saw, because she always saw, and she went back behind the counter and gave him the space to feel what he needed to feel without an audience. He ate every bite. He left $3 in the jar on his way out, money he probably couldn't spare, and Mabel watched him go and thought about how hunger hides itself in old men the same way it hides in 5-year-old girls. Quietly, without complaint, behind a wall of pride that the world mistakes for dignity. The jar stayed. It became permanent, not because Mabel declared it permanent, but because the town kept filling it, and eventually the thing you keep doing becomes the thing you've always done, and that's how change works. Not through announcements, but through repetition. The second shift happened with Ray Perkins. Ray had not slept well since Mabel's speech. He had told himself for years that he was a good cop, that he cared about his community, that when it mattered, he showed up. And now he was lying awake at 2 a.m. and replaying the moment he had slowed his patrol car, looked at Emma Dawson on those steps, and kept driving. And the replay was getting louder instead of quieter, and no amount of rationalization was turning down the volume. On Monday morning, he drove to the county records office. He didn't tell anyone he was going. He signed in, requested the file on Jacob Holden's property, the 40 acres on Stonewall Road, and sat at a table in the back room for 3 hours, reading. What he found made his stomach turn. 5 code violations had been filed against Jake's property in the last 5 years. Every single one had been initiated by the town council. Every single one targeted Jake's land exclusively. No comparable violations had been filed against any neighboring property with identical conditions. The violations cited drainage issues, fence height infractions, and a supposed zoning conflict, all of which, when Ray cross-referenced the county ordinances, turned out to be either fabricated or applied selectively in a way that had no legal basis. The town had been trying to push Jake off his own land, legally, quietly, through paperwork instead of pitchforks, but the intent was the same. Ray sat at that table and read the file twice. Then he pulled out a legal pad and started writing. 4 pages. Every violation, every discrepancy, every instance where the code was applied to Jake's property and not to identical properties within the same district. He wrote it clearly, factually, without emotion, because he had learned through years of law enforcement that the most damaging reports are the ones that don't need to shout. He delivered it to the county commissioner on Wednesday afternoon. "What am I looking at?" Commissioner Bill Hendricks said, flipping through the pages. Selective enforcement, Ray said, against one property owner. 5 violations in 5 years, none of them legitimate. None of them applied consistently. It's targeted. That's a strong word. It's the right word. Hendricks read for a long time. He took off his glasses. He put them back on. He read again. Who's the property owner? Jake Holden. Hendricks looked up. The Hells Angels guy? The property owner, Ray said, who happens to ride a motorcycle. Hendricks set the report down. I'll look into it. I'd appreciate that. 7 weeks later, the pending rezoning action against Jake's property was withdrawn. The official record described it as an administrative correction. The unofficial reality was that someone had finally put the facts on paper, and the facts didn't leave room for the story the town had been telling. Ray didn't tell Jake. He didn't need to. But 3 weeks after the withdrawal, Jake walked into Mabel's on a Saturday morning and found Ray at the counter, and he sat down next to him and ordered coffee. And neither of them said anything for a while. Then Jake said, I heard the rezoning thing got dropped. Administrative correction, Ray said. That's what they're calling it? That's what the paper says. Jake nodded slowly. I appreciate you looking into it. I should have looked into it 5 years ago. Yeah, Jake said, you should have. There was no warmth in it, no easy forgiveness, no handshake, no moment of reconciliation that tied everything up with a bow. It was 2 men sitting at a counter drinking coffee, one of whom had done something right after years of doing nothing, and the other of whom was acknowledging it without pretending it erased the years that came before. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The third shift was Tommy Ballard's repair clinic. Tommy had been running the free Saturday clinic out of the Hells Angels clubhouse garage for 3 years. Every other Saturday, he opened the bay doors, set up his tools, and fixed whatever people brought. Lawnmowers, cars, washing machines, anything with an engine or a motor that had stopped doing what it was supposed to do. He charged nothing. He asked nothing. The only rule was first come, first served, and the only requirement was showing up. For 3 years, the same 12 people came, regulars, mostly single mothers and elderly folks from the edges of town. The people who couldn't afford a mechanic and had learned, through necessity, to swallow their discomfort about walking onto Hells Angels property because the alternative was a broken car and no way to get to work. The Saturday after Mabel's speech, Curtis Hayes showed up. He came in his pickup truck with a lawnmower in the back that hadn't started in 2 years and an expression on his face that Tommy would later describe to Marcus as the look of a man who's about to get a tooth pulled and is trying to pretend it doesn't hurt. Tommy walked out to the truck. Curtis. Tommy. What have you got? Lawnmower. Won't start. Been sitting in my garage since the summer before last. Tommy looked at the mower. Bring it in. Curtis hesitated. He looked at the clubhouse. He looked at the Hells Angels signage. He looked at the row of Harleys parked along the side of the building. He was calculating something, the cost of his pride versus the cost of a new lawnmower, and the math was apparently decisive because he lifted the mower out of the truck and carried it into the garage without another word. Tommy had it running in 40 minutes. Carburetor was gummed up, spark plug was shot, air filter hadn't been changed since the Clinton administration. He cleaned it, replaced what needed replacing, and handed it back. That's it? That's it. What do I owe you? Curtis. The sign says free. Curtis stood there holding his running lawnmower with the expression of a man who has just received something he didn't earn and is trying to figure out where to put the feeling. I haven't been fair to you, Curtis said, or to Jake, or to Marcus. I've been cutting hair and listening to people talk and I went along with it. I should have known better. Tommy wiped his hands on a rag. You're here now. That's not enough. It's a start. Curtis came back the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. By the 4th week, he wasn't just bringing things to be fixed. He was helping, holding tools, cleaning parts, handing Tommy wrenches with the earnest, slightly clumsy enthusiasm of a man who is learning something new at an age when most men have decided they're done learning. The clinic grew. 4 new regulars the first month, 7 the second. People who had driven past the clubhouse for years without stopping were now pulling into the lot on Saturday mornings, and each one arrived with the same mixture of need and nervousness, and each one left with something fixed and something else, harder to name but equally real, adjusted inside themselves. Marcus Cole, for his part, experienced the shift differently. Marcus had done 2 tours in Afghanistan. He'd come back with a Purple Heart, a case of PTSD the VA had done nothing to address, and the particular, isolating silence of a man who has seen things that most people can't imagine and has learned that talking about them makes civilians uncomfortable, so he stopped talking. The club had saved him. Jake had saved him. Not with words, Jake wasn't a words person, but with structure, with brotherhood, with the daily practical reality of being needed and known and expected to show up. The club gave Marcus a reason to get out of bed, and on the days when that wasn't enough, it gave him people who would come to his house and sit with him without requiring him to explain why he was sitting in the dark. Ridgefield had never known any of this. Ridgefield saw a big black man with tattoos on a Harley-Davidson wearing a Hells Angels vest, and Ridgefield decided that was the whole story. The Wednesday after Mabel's speech, Marcus walked past the barber shop on his way to the hardware store, and Curtis Hayes came to the door. "Marcus." Marcus stopped. He turned. In 8 years, Curtis Hayes had never spoken to him directly, had never done more than the tight, compressed nod that people give when they want to acknowledge someone's existence without engaging with it. "You want a cup of coffee?" Curtis said. Marcus looked at him. "You serious?" "I've got a fresh pot." Marcus stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. He was doing the calculation that every person who has been excluded does when they're suddenly invited in. Is this real? Is this a trap? Is this guilt masquerading as friendliness? And does the distinction matter if the coffee is hot? He walked in. Curtis poured him a cup. They sat in the barber chairs, Marcus in the first chair, Curtis in the second, and they drank coffee and didn't talk for a while because Marcus didn't talk much and Curtis had finally learned that silence from a man like Marcus wasn't hostility. It was trust being tested. "My nephew did a tour in Kandahar," Curtis said eventually. "Came back different, wouldn't talk about it. Most of us don't. He's doing better now, took a while." "It takes a while." Curtis nodded. He sipped his coffee. "You doing okay?" It was a simple question, the kind of question that costs nothing to ask and can mean everything to receive. And the fact that no one in Ridgefield, not one person outside the club, had asked Marcus that question in 8 years was a failure so quiet and so complete that it had become invisible. "Some days," Marcus said. "Yeah, some days I'm okay." "And the other days?" Marcus looked at his coffee. "The other days I've got brothers who show up." Curtis was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Well, you've got one more now, if you want it." Marcus didn't respond right away. He finished his coffee. He set the cup down. He stood up. "Thanks for the coffee, Curtis." "Any time, I mean it." Marcus walked out. He got halfway down the block before he stopped, turned around, and walked back to the barbershop door. "Curtis." "Yeah?" "Tuesday mornings are the hard ones. If that coffee offer's real, Tuesdays would be good." Curtis didn't hesitate. "I open at 7. "I'll be here at 7. Marcus nodded once and walked away. And Curtis stood in the doorway of his shop, watching a man he'd spent 8 years avoiding walk down Broad Street, and he felt the specific, uncomfortable, necessary weight of understanding just how much damage can be done by simply deciding not to see someone. Jessica Dawson started at the Dollar General on Monday, $11.50 an hour. Not enough by any reasonable measure, but consistent, steady, real. Her manager, Rhonda, turned out to be the kind of boss you get maybe twice in a lifetime, if you're lucky. A woman who had survived her own bankruptcy and her own custody fight, and who understood, in her bones and her blood, what it meant to show up for work when your life was held together with tape and prayer. Rhonda adjusted the schedule around Emma's school hours without Jessica having to ask. When Jessica apologized for the inconvenience, Rhonda looked at her and said, "You have a kid. Kids have schedules. This isn't charity, it's common sense. Stop apologizing." Jessica stopped apologizing. By the third week, she had paid 2 months ahead on the trailer. She had a small, growing balance in her checking account that she checked twice a day, not to spend, but to confirm it was real. The number was modest. It would have been meaningless to most people. To Jessica, it was proof of something she had stopped believing, that the ground under her feet could hold. She ate 3 meals a day, every day. She had stopped smiling the practice smile, the wall in the shape of a smile that she'd built to keep people from seeing how close to collapse she was. The new smile was messier, less controlled. It came at unexpected moments. When Emma said something funny at dinner, when Rhonda told a joke in the stockroom, when she opened the refrigerator and saw food on every shelf and felt the quiet shock of abundance after months of counting crackers. She cooked breakfast every morning, every single morning. Eggs, bacon, toast, orange juice. She set 2 places at the table, and she ate with her daughter, and she never again pretended she wasn't hungry. And Emma never again had to watch her mother's hands shake while pouring water from the tap. The first time Emma saw Jessica eat a full plate without hesitation, without offering half of it away, without the careful performance of someone who is secretly starving, Emma put down her fork and said, "Mama, you're eating everything." "I am." "Good," Emma said, and she went back to her eggs with the satisfied, matter-of-fact approval of a child who has been carrying a worry she was too young to name and has finally been allowed to set it down. That Saturday, Jessica drove to the Hope Bridge Food Bank, not to pick up groceries, to volunteer. Grace Holloway met her at the door. "You here for a box?" "I'm here to help." Grace studied her for a moment. Then she smiled. The real kind. The kind that reaches the eyes and stays. "Come on in. I'll put you on intake." Jessica spent 4 hours sorting donations, organizing shelves, and sitting with a young woman named Maria who had come in with 2 children and the same expression Jessica had worn 3 weeks ago. The tight jaw, the bright eyes, the wall built in the shape of composure. Jessica didn't say, "I know how you feel," because she had learned that phrase does more for the person saying it than the person hearing it. Instead, she said, "My name's Jessica. I'm going to help you carry these to your car." And she did. And Maria didn't cry, which meant that Jessica had done it right, had offered help without requiring the person to crack open in order to receive it. She drove home that afternoon feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Not happiness, not yet. Something quieter, the sense of being useful, of having hands that could do something other than hold on. She was still thinking about it when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Jessica, it's Jake." She pulled over. She didn't know why. It just seemed like the kind of call you should be still for. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Out on my property, on Stonewall Road, I've got 40 acres and a barn. I want to build a community garden, open to anyone. People come, take what they need. I've got the labor, Tommy, Marcus, a few of the guys. But I'm not an organizer. I don't know the paperwork, the outreach, the scheduling." He paused. "Grace said you volunteered at Hope Bridge today." "I did." "She said you were good at it." Jessica sat in her car on the shoulder of Highway 41 and felt something open inside her chest. Not the cracking open of breaking, but the opening of a door she hadn't known was there. "I organized a PTA fundraiser once," she said, "before everything fell apart." "Can you organize a garden?" She almost laughed. She almost cried. What came out was something in between, a sound that carried the weight of 2 years of being told, in 1,000 small ways, that she was not capable, Not sufficient. Not enough. Yeah, she said. I think I can. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, Stonewall Road. Bring Emma if you want. Tommy's bringing his grill. He hung up. Jake Holden was not a man who lingered on phone calls. Jessica sat in her car for a full minute, holding the phone against her chest. Then she pulled back onto the highway and drove home to tell her daughter they were going to a farm on Saturday to help build something. And Emma said, "Can I bring my $5? And Jessica said, "You can bring whatever you want, baby." And Emma went to her room and took the $5 bill out of the ceramic piggy bank and put it in the pocket of her overalls for Saturday, because she still didn't know what she was saving it for, but she had a feeling she was getting close. Saturday morning came in warm and still, and Jessica Dawson pulled onto Stonewall Road at 10 minutes to 9, with Emma in the passenger seat, the $5 bill in Emma's overalls pocket, and a feeling in her chest she hadn't had in so long she'd forgotten its name. It was hope. She recognized it the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. Not all at once, but in pieces, the melody arriving before the words. Jake's property opened up at the end of a gravel road, 40 acres, a barn with a new tin roof that caught the morning light. And already, before Jessica had even parked, she could hear Tommy Ballard's voice carrying across the field, arguing with Marcus Cole about where to set up the grill. "I'm telling you, it goes by the barn. And I'm telling you, wind's coming from the east. You put it by the barn, smoke goes straight into everybody's face. Marcus, I've been grilling since before you could spell grill. That doesn't mean you know where to put one." Jessica parked. Emma was out of the car before the engine stopped, running toward the field with the headlong, full-body joy of a 5-year-old who has been told she's going to a farm and has decided that this is the greatest thing that has ever happened to anyone in the history of the world. Jake was by the barn, unloading fence posts from the back of his truck. He saw Jessica and gave a nod, the same firm, compressed nod he always gave, carrying the same weight of things unsaid but understood. "Morning. Morning. Where do you need me?" He handed her a clipboard. On it was a hand-drawn map of the South section, rough, practical, with measurements written in pencil in areas marked off for planting beds, walking paths, a water station, and a small shed for tools. "I drew it up," he said, "but I don't know how to make it work for people. The layout, the scheduling, who gets what, how to get the word out. That's your part." Jessica studied the map. She turned it sideways. She turned it back. Her mind was already moving, the way a mind moves when it's been starving for a purpose, the way a body starves for food, and has finally been given something to work with. "You've got the beds too close together," she said. "People need room to kneel, especially the older folks, and you'll want a sign-up station at the entrance so people can reserve plots. First come, first served, but with a wait list so nobody drives out here for nothing." Jake looked at her. "How do you know all that?" "I did a community garden project in high school. Agriculture class. Mrs. Henderson. She made us design the whole thing, layout, budget, volunteer schedule." Jessica paused. "I got an A." Something moved across Jake's face. Not surprise, recognition. The look of a man who is seeing someone clearly for the first time and realizing that what he's seeing has been there all along, waiting to be noticed. "Okay," he said. "It's yours." "What's mine?" "The whole thing, the organization, the outreach. I'll build whatever you draw. You tell me where it goes." Jessica held the clipboard against her chest. She opened her mouth to say she wasn't qualified, that she was just a stock clerk at the Dollar General, that she hadn't finished college, that she was probably the wrong person for this. She closed her mouth. She'd spent 2 years telling herself she wasn't enough. She was done. "I'll have a plan by Tuesday," she said. "I'll be here." By 10 o'clock, the property was alive. Tommy had won the grill argument. It went by the barn, and Marcus was right about the wind, so the smoke drifted into everyone's face exactly as predicted, and nobody cared because the burgers were good and the morning was better. 8 people came that first Saturday: Jake, Tommy, Marcus, Jessica, Emma, Grace Holloway, and 2 men from the club. A mechanic named Daryl who didn't talk much, and a retired welder named Pete who talked constantly and had opinions about everything, especially soil drainage. They cleared brush. They marked fence lines. They dug the first planting beds, 3 long rows, each one measured and staked with the precision of men who built things for a living and took the work seriously, regardless of what the thing was. Emma helped. She carried small rocks from the field to a pile by the barn with a solemn dedication of a child who has been given a job and intends to perform it to the highest possible standard. She counted each rock as she placed it. By noon, she had counted 47 and was not tired and was not stopping. Grace stood with Jessica at the edge of the field watching. "He's wanted to do this for years," Grace said. "He told me about it the first time he came to Hope Bridge. Said he had the land, but not the people." "He has the people now," Jessica said. "He has you," Grace corrected. "That's what changed." Jessica didn't answer. She was watching Emma carry rocks, and she was thinking about the steps outside the feed store, and the $5 bill, and the way Jake had sat down without being asked, and the chain of events that had led from that single act to this field on this morning with these people building something that didn't exist yesterday and would exist tomorrow. She was thinking about the word emergency and how Emma had held on to those $5 because she wasn't sure if starving counted. "Grace," she said. "Yeah?" "She kept the money. My daughter. She kept $5 in her pocket for 5 days because I told her it was for emergencies, and she wasn't sure if being hungry was an emergency." Jessica's voice cracked. 5 years old, and she wasn't sure. Grace put her hand on Jessica's arm. "She's sure now. Look at her." Emma was talking to Marcus, who was kneeling beside a fence post, and she was explaining something to him with the animated hand gestures of a child who has a lot to say and has found someone willing to listen. Marcus, 6'4", 260 pounds, a face that had been making people cross the street for 8 years, was nodding with the patient, careful attention of a man who understood that being listened to by a child was a privilege, not an obligation. "She told me he's her friend," Jessica said. "Marcus." She said, "Mama, Marcus is my friend. He waves at me." That's her criteria. He waves at her. "Kids are better at this than we are," Grace said. "Kids are better at everything." By noon, the first 3 beds were dug, the fence line was marked, and Tommy was serving burgers to everyone from the grill that was exactly where he said it should be, and exactly as smoky as Marcus said it would be. And the argument had become a joke, which had become a tradition, which is how all the best things between friends begin. They sat in a loose circle on overturned buckets and tailgates, eating and talking and not talking, and the silence between conversations was the good kind, the kind that means everyone is comfortable enough to stop performing. Jake sat beside Jessica. Emma was on his other side, eating a burger with both hands, ketchup on her chin. "This is going to work," Jessica said. "Yeah. I mean really work. I already have ideas for outreach. The churches, the school, the senior center. Grace can coordinate with Hope Bridge so the overflow from the garden goes straight to families who need it. Tommy said he'd build raised beds for people who can't kneel. Curtis Hayes from the barbershop. He stopped me on the street yesterday and asked if he could help." Curtis? Curtis. He said he wants to do something useful with his Saturdays. Jake was quiet for a moment. He held his coffee cup between his hands and looked out across the field. The cleared ground, the staked rows, the beginning of something that had been an idea on graph paper 3 weeks ago and was now dirt under his fingernails, and a plan on a clipboard, and a woman beside him who had organized a high school garden project and was about to organize something much bigger. "I didn't expect any of this," he said. "Any of what?" "Any of it. I sat down on those steps because a kid was hungry. That's the whole thing. That was the whole reason. That's how it starts, Jessica said, with one person sitting down. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was not romance and not friendship and not gratitude, but something rarer. The recognition of two people who have been carrying heavy things alone for a long time and have just realized they don't have to. Emma finished her burger. She wiped her hands on her overalls and reached into her pocket and pulled out the $5 bill. She held it up and studied it. She had been carrying this bill for weeks. Through the hunger and the waiting and the steps and the chicken fried steak and the pie and the days that followed and the mornings when her mother cooked breakfast and the afternoons at Hope Bridge and the drive out to this field on this Saturday morning. "Jake," she said. "Yeah, kid. I know what I want to spend my $5 on." "What's that?" "Seeds." Jake went very still. Jessica put her hand over her mouth. "I want to buy seeds," Emma said, "for the garden, so people can grow food, so nobody has to be hungry like I was." She said it the way children say the truest things, without drama, without performance, without any awareness of the weight of what she was saying. She said it because it was obvious, because in the clear, uncomplicated logic of a 5-year-old mind, the connection between hunger and seeds and a garden and the man who had sat beside her when nobody else would was a straight line, and the $5 in her hand were the bridge between what had happened and what could happen next. Jake reached out and put his hand on top of her head, gently, the way you touch something precious that you're afraid of breaking. "That's a real good use of $5, kid." "Will it buy a lot of seeds?" "It'll buy enough to start." Emma nodded, satisfied, complete. She folded the bill carefully and handed it to Jessica. "Mama, can you keep it safe until we go to the store?" "I'll keep it safe," Jessica said. Her voice was barely there. She was holding a $5 bill that her daughter had carried through 5 days of hunger and weeks of uncertainty and had chosen, freely and without prompting, to spend on feeding other people. She would frame that bill. She would put it on the wall of the garden shed that Jake would build, and Tommy would wire for electricity, and Marcus would paint, and it would hang there for years, faded and creased and worth exactly $5 and worth absolutely everything. And every person who walked into that shed would see it and ask about it, and the story would be told again, and the telling would matter, because stories are how we remember the things we must not forget. The Ridgefield Community Garden opened 6 weeks later. 24 plots, a tool shed, a water station, a sign at the entrance that Jessica had designed and Jake had built, hand-painted, simple, with 5 words in white letters on green wood. "Take what you need, give what you can." 41 families used the garden in its first season. 3 churches donated supplies. The high school sent volunteers. Curtis Hayes showed up every Saturday with coffee from his shop and a willingness to do whatever needed doing. Ray Perkins helped build the parking area on his days off and didn't mention it to anyone. Mabel's community jar kept filling. Hope Bridge had its strongest quarter in 15 years. Tommy's repair clinic doubled in size. Marcus had coffee with Curtis every Tuesday at 7, and on the mornings when Marcus was quiet and the darkness was close, Curtis didn't try to fix it. He just poured another cup and sat with him, and that was enough. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do for another person is simply not leave. Lorraine Vickers came to the garden in October. She came alone. She came in the late afternoon when most people had gone home. She walked through the rows slowly, touching the leaves of the tomato plants, looking at the beans climbing their poles, reading the small, hand-painted signs that Emma had made for each plot with the help of her new best friend, Sophia. Jessica found her standing by the tool shed, looking at the $5 bill in the frame on the wall. Lorraine. Lorraine turned. She had aged in the weeks since Mabel's speech, not physically, but in the way a person ages when they have been carrying something they can no longer put down. Her face held a different kind of weight, less armor, more exposure. "I should have stopped," Lorraine said. "That day, when Emma was on the steps, I should have stopped and I didn't. And I've been trying to find a way to say that to you that doesn't sound like I'm asking you to forgive me." "Are you asking me to forgive you?" "No, I'm not sure I've earned that." Jessica looked at her for a long time. "There's a plot open in row 3. We need someone to take it over. The woman who had it moved to Macon." Lorraine blinked. "You want me to?" "I want you to grow something, that's all. Come on Saturdays, get your hands dirty. Whatever grows, you give half to Hope Bridge and keep half for yourself. That's the deal." Lorraine stared at her. Then she looked at the garden, the rows, the paths, the shed with the $5 bill on the wall, the whole improbable, impossible thing that had grown from a concrete step and a plate of chicken fried steak and a man who sat down. "Okay," she said. "I'll be here Saturday. We start at 9. Lorraine nodded. She turned and walked back to her car. At the gate, she stopped. "Jessica." "Yeah?" "She's a remarkable kid, Emma." "I know." Lorraine left. Jessica stood in the garden alone, and she looked at the rows of food growing from the ground that Jake Holden had cleared with his own hands. And she thought about how everything that had happened, every meal, every conversation, every shift, every apology, every Tuesday morning coffee, and every Saturday morning repair, and every dollar in Mabel's jar, had started because a man on a motorcycle saw a hungry child and didn't walk past. 53 people walked past Emma Dawson that Thursday afternoon. A preacher, a deputy, a shopkeeper, a teacher, a whole town full of people who went to church on Sunday and said, "Bless her heart," on Monday, and walked past a starving 5-year-old on Thursday because they had decided she was someone else's problem. And then Jake Holden pulled up. He killed the engine, he saw the girl, and he sat down. He didn't make a speech. He didn't start a movement. He didn't ask for credit or recognition or gratitude. He bought a child a meal. He gave her mother a phone number. He offered his land, his labor, and his time. And in doing so, he held up a mirror to an entire town and showed them the distance between who they were and who they believed themselves to be. Some of them closed their eyes. Some of them looked. Some of them are still looking. Emma Dawson kept her $5 for something good. And when the time came, she spent them on seeds. Because a 5-year-old girl who had been hungry for 5 days understood something that 53 adults had missed. You don't walk past. You sit down. You ask the question. You feed the person in front of you. And if you have $5 and a pocket full of faith, you plant something that grows. That is the whole story. That is the only story that has ever mattered. And it started the way all the best ones do, not with a hero, but with a man who simply refused to look away.